And good morning, everybody. We're live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another amazing week of super awesome products that are made safely and in the best wholesome manner possible that we all know, love, and enjoy. And part of the problem with working in food safety and food quality is that a lot of that effort goes unnoticed, but we notice it here. So Austin, Morrine, and myself, thank you very much. We appreciate all that you do. And if you're new to the food safety chat, welcome. Pull up a chair. We're going to talk about a food safety topic for about an hour. And what you'll notice around this is that this is not a presentation. This is meant to be a discussion. And that's really, really the fun part of it. And what's cool about this is I get to bring people like Austin and Morrine on the show here because this is one of the ways we got to know each other is through the chat and all the fun things that we do here. And we're building this community, and a lot of times the same people are able to join us every week. And we recognize as well that an hour of your time to join us and learn is a significant amount of time. So we have a whole lot of respect for you and everything that you're doing to make sure that food is safe. So as I mentioned, Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And if you've watched the chat at all in the past, you're going to be really happy to see who our guests are today. We have Austin Welch with Meritech, and Morrine Omolo, who is with Jonny Pops, and she is their quality engineer. Austin and Morrine, how are you guys doing today?
Doing good, man. Just got back in from, where was I? Cincinnati. Just got back in from Cincinnati. Yeah, yesterday. So good to be back in Colorado. We got another beautiful day here, and ready to chat about food safety training, education, GMPs, all the fun stuff.
Absolutely. And so, Morrine, are you in Minnesota or are you traveling?
No, I'm home in Minnesota. Good morning, everyone. It's getting warmer, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's this is kind of like fall spring in Colorado. You get used to the mid 60s and 70s. It's been very windy for the past few days, but you're like, yes, the snow is over. And granted, it's been a very mild winter here. But when we get slammed, and Austin knows this because he's out here too, is March, April, May is when you get snow. And if the leaves are out on the trees, oh man, it's never a good thing.
Yep, I've got some flowers already blooming, so I feel bad for them because they're going to get pummeled here in a couple of weeks.
My wife's very excited. She bought some little things for growing seedlings, and so we saved seeds from last year for marigolds, and then so she's also got some zinnias, and we put them in these little things and got some little UV grow lights off of Amazon, and they are kicking butt. In a week, they're already like 2 inches tall. They've already reached the top of the plastic. It's like, wow. She's like, my wife, if she could put flowers over the entire backyard, she would do it. And let's see, everybody's filing out. So of course, Joseph, good morning. Tim did an awesome job on the chat recently. Morgan, good to see you. LinkedIn user, I always hate it when LinkedIn user pops up because I don't know who you are. Chris, nice to see you as well. So before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping items. Everybody, please join us for your favorite ceremonial beverage drink. Cheers. Very, very good. Oh, my phone is barking at me. You need to turn you off. Crazy phones. They are so good at getting our attention, aren't they?
Right.
Ugh. I try and fight it. All right, so for the dad joke today, guys, we're going into a little bit of controversial territory here. So everybody be forewarned. Here's your what they got. Here's your trigger warning right here. So dad joke right here. Austin and Morrine, how do you know that atoms are Catholic?
You got me on that one.
They have mass.
Oh, would you look at the time? I gotta go.
I just remembered some stuff. I got some stuff.
I gotta wash my hair.
Cara, good morning, Cara. Half my front yard will be wildflowers, so I'm your wife. Deja's here as well. So a quick shout out for Tasia. He's getting ready to graduate here pretty soon, and he's going to be looking around. So if you're looking to hire somebody in food safety, food quality space, he's your guy. So shout out for him. He's doing great things out there. He's I love to see the engagement with this next generation of food safety professionals that are coming up. They're willing to get out there, discuss these type of things, and really contribute right out of the gate. And that's just the best. It's awesome. I love it. And I think that's a good segue then to our topic for today, which is, and we do this on the chat every now and then, is we can get fancy and talk about the latest AI and what are the newest trends in sanitation and all of these things that are out there coming down the road. But we need to remember the basics, and we need to remember those things that make everything else work. And I always call that, the blocking and tackling. And a big chunk of this is training, and in particular, GMPs. And just to kind of paint the picture for this, because I think everybody, if you relate to this, let me know, is training is viewed as a chore. It's something that you have to do, right? So with GMPs, it's written in the third-party standards that you need to do your GMP training at least once a year, and you need to train new people on these programs. And nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants to do it. The quality manager's got stuff to do. She realizes she's got to put the training together, goes and begs the operations manager for time with the team. The response from the operations manager is they're all busy. They're making product and making money. Thank you very much. And, I can't spare my people. They're all super duper important. And it's like, ugh. So finally they figure out a time at the end of the shift where everybody can meet for the training in the upstairs conference room. It's hot. It's dark. It's the same damn PowerPoint they show every single year, to the point where the people in the audience are mouthing along with the presentation of what the instructor is saying. There's people in the back that are trying to sleep. So the QA manager, she's trying to do everything she can to keep everybody engaged, but it ain't happening. And it even gets to the point where she's standing up there going, oh, okay, guys, come on. We just need to get through this. Everybody needs to take the quiz. Somebody in the back goes, hey, everybody, the answers are A, B, C, B, A. It's like, oh, don't do that. And everybody just leaves going, they're all walking out the door going, oh, what a freaking waste of time. And it is, isn't it?
Definitely whenever it's set up like that. Yeah. That's one of the interesting things about, leading, by practice, if the leader kind of puts out that idea of like, we just got to get through this, then that's the tone that has been set, is that this isn't really that important. It's a chore that needs to be gotten, that we need to get through.
Yeah. And
having the facility,
as hard as that person may try, that subconscious, those cues still come through, and everybody picks up on it. Now, not to mention as well, people always miss the training. So now the poor quality manager, she's got to try and track down those people to complete the roster. There's also people on vacation, people who are actively trying to avoid the training. And then there's new employees over the course of the year, and we're going to get to all of that. So what we wanted to kind of talk about today is effective GMP training. And this is something that both of you are very, very involved with. And so I want to make sure that we have a lot of time to get into this with you, because we think a lot of times that this is just superfluous. It doesn't really mean that much, but all you got to do is read warning letters. And warning letters are always broken up into kind of three areas. And the first is FDA's regulatory authority. So they will say under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act for adulteration and misbranding of product, blah, blah, blah. And then they will go into the deviations, and they almost always start with GMPs. While I was on the floor, I observed this. While I was on the floor, I saw people who didn't wash their hands. I saw somebody pick up, God forbid, a piece of food on the ground and put it back on the production line. All these, and they'll list out all these GMP violations, and then they'll get to the failures in the food safety plan and all these things. And the message from FDA is always the same, which is, if you guys can't even take care of GMPs, why would I expect you to have a good food safety plan? Does that make sense?
I think so. And I like Tim's question because he basically set up for the discussion. That's the question we'll be trying to answer. And to me, it always goes back to, for the longest time, we've been hearing, going back to the tenets of how people learn, what motivates people, what keeps them captivated. And the question I always ask is, whose perspective, what lens are we answering those questions through?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm using my interpretation of that question, what keeps me captivated, what keeps me interested in learning, on my top 5 list of strengths, learning is number 1. You don't have to do very much to get me interested in a book or a topic or a course. I'll bring myself to New York if that's where the course is happening. For some people, learning is the least interesting thing for them, just the task of having to sit through learning new material. And so, yes, it's important to think about how people learn and what motivates them. But the lens through which we're evaluating that is critical. Are you using their lens to answer that question, or are you using yours as a trainer?
Yeah, and that's a really big one, I think, because when I first got into learning design and creating courses, I'm like Morrine. I enjoy learning, so I was under that assumption, right, that this is everybody's going to be thrilled about this and excited, and you're right. It's new information, and if that's what motivates you, then there's that assumption, and then so I had to kind of like rewire my brain a little bit to say, okay, how do I create something for somebody who's not interested in this topic at all, and how do we get back into the motivation aspect of it, of like what motivates these people, and I think that's what's beautiful about research within motivation theory, is that researchers have been spending the past 30, 40 years trying to find out what are universal motivators, regardless of who somebody is or what their particular interests are, or where they're from, or what their education level is. We know that there are certain things that motivate people, and one of them is that sense of connection, that connectedness. And I think that's why classroom and classroom training can be so much more powerful than online training. And we see, we leverage online a lot because it is faster and cheaper and, to roll out. But when we're looking at, developing like critical thinking and engaging people, there's an automatic plus to bringing people together into a room and actually working together, because that's a natural human trait that we enjoy that collaboration.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in my previous example of this poor quality manager struggling to teach these people, that group engagement can work the other way as well, can't it, Austin? So she is enforcing through that group negative behaviors.
Yeah. Context is always important in everything in life. There's no silver bullet, because there's also bringing people into a classroom, and you got to wrangle that. There's always that one person, right, that that you got to handle appropriately. So there's no panacea, so to speak. But for me, that's, in my experience, that's always been the strongest environment, is that within bringing people together into a group space.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Any other thoughts around that, Morrine?
I'm echoing Austin's point, and Kira kind of underscores what we're all trying to say very well, is in our thinking about training. And I think Bryan, you and I were talking about this yesterday during the prep session. Whenever I'm interacting with people about food safety, whether it's a required training experience or just conversations with people in general, consumers and professionals, I'm always very curious about their food safety story. What got them started? What got them interested? What keeps them up at night if you're a food safety manager or something like that? So
Right.
when I'm training contractors, for example, they're coming in for one specific thing, which probably will last 20 minutes, and then they're out of here and we might never see them again. However, we do have a way of doing things, and they need to be informed of that way of doing things. How do I connect with this person in the short period that we are going to have and convince them that what I'm telling them is relevant for the 20 minutes they're going to be in the building?
Yeah.
And to Kira's point, not everybody is motivated by money or social justice or all of these statistics that we try to use to move people's hearts. Some people are just moved by money, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But understanding what motivates people allows you to start from a point of strength, because then you know what buttons to push, so to speak, to get them engaged and interested. Nobody makes money when there's a foodborne illness and people are dying. It is crisis for the entire industry. People suffer, the industry suffers, consumer confidence suffers. So coming to that point of you have 100 people in a room, maybe you have 3 or 4 groups of motivation types in the room. Understanding that dynamic and preempting some of those potential issues that you have within those groups ahead of time levels the playground so that your constant resistor starts off from level ground. They don't have an upper hand over you when you're starting training, but you can't know that by blind default. It's something you learn through experience and preparing yourself ahead of time.
Yep, and really what we're talking about here, and this is persuasion. How do you, and this is a skill, even going beyond training of GMPs that we're talking about here today. This is persuasion for everything that you do in your job. If you want your boss to give you money for a project, or you want to bring a new employee onto your team, these persuasion skills that we're talking about here today translate to everything that you do in your job. And so the point that's being made here that I want to stress is you need to move yourself around to the other side of the table and put yourself in their shoes. And what I wanted to kind of get into here a little bit is specific examples around areas within GMP training that people push back on and gets really hard to do. And the first one of these is gloves, right? And if you start with this process of looking at these motivations, like Morrine is talking about here, is our assumption that people understand how food manufacturing works is a big mistake. So if I just come into the plants and I'm a new employee, what are the odds I've ever actually worn gloves before for anything? Maybe if I'm at home working on my car or chopping up some vegetables, maybe. But most people probably don't do that either. So they have no background experience on why gloves are even needed and what is the status of the glove. And people have these false assumptions, which is, we all know this one very well, is, oh, I put on the gloves and these are a magic barrier that protects me from everything and I can do anything I want. I've got gloves on. And that's part of flipping that script around and getting that viewpoint from their view, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think even with the gloves thing, like basically all of these GMPs, it's getting back to the making sure that we include the why this is important. Because I think especially with GMPs, for most of us that have worked around this for so long, we have the curse of knowledge. It's that we assume that people have a baseline understanding of why we do these things. And that's a bad assumption to go into training with, because we want to be able to go in and be able to explain to them why we're doing this, so that now they have the ability to think critically about, okay, now I'm not just doing this because I'm told to do it. I have a reason and an understanding of why I'm doing it. And so that's like one of the biggest things that I'm always drilling on whenever I'm trying to communicate something, is making sure I'm including the why. Because it's so easy to just tell people, just do this thing, right? And move on. And, we've got bigger fish to fry, right? And so we're going to, blast through this. But getting into the why of all these things. Why do we wear the hairnets? Why do we wash our hands, so many times throughout the day? Why do we, not pick up food off the floor and then continue on, even though we have our magic gloves on?
Yeah, and so a really good point here is during live training shows use real world GMP violations to be observed and engage with the audience. Fantastic point. You beat me to it because I had for the next example of things we fight with on training that Austin just mentioned is hairnets. There's this constant battle of how far can I put the hairnet up on my head before my boss yells at me. That's not the purpose of the hairnet. And there was a really good trainer I worked with in my past at one of my companies, and he was out at my plant in Nampa, Idaho. And I would sit in on his GMP trainings. And to your point, Austin, he wouldn't just sit there and say, we need to wear hairnets because this is part of 21 CFR 117, and it's a requirement of this facility, our policy to, what he would do is say, here's why we wear hairnets. Who here likes hair in their food? No, nobody likes hair in their food? Good, I don't either. That's why we wear hairnets. Let me show you how to wear a hairnet. And so he would show and right over the ears and all the fun stuff we're used to. But then what he would do during the training, to the commenter's point here, is he would leave the room, come back in, and his hairnet would be askew and not quite right. And he would do this for all the elements of the training. And he would say, okay, what's wrong? And he would get everybody engaged. It's like, oh, your ears aren't covered. Yeah, you're right. My ears aren't covered, right? Okay, hairnet's down here. What else do you guys see? It's too far up in the front. Yeah. And then he would pull it down. Is there anything else? How are we doing? Is there anything else with my hairnet? No? Good. He's like, and he would engage, and he was teaching, to Morrine's point, he was teaching the team how to self-check as well. So if you make this a habit, then as the team is getting ready to go onto the production floor, they're going through these habits. And if somebody isn't wearing their hairnet correctly, it's going to be, hey, Austin, your hairnet's not, oh, thanks, right? And helping to reinforce that behavior as a team.
And what he's doing there is also providing the opportunity for practice, right? Because a lot of times we see within training, it's just knowledge information, right? We're just giving people information, but he's giving the opportunity for people to practice a new skill, because having information is one thing, but having the skill is another. And so he's giving them, and to develop any skill, we have to have some practice time. And so that's a great way to develop that practice time into the training, because that's getting them, once again, to think critically about it. Like, oh, okay, now I understand why I do it, and I know how to identify when it's incorrect.
Yeah. Well, and to Morrine's point as well, which is you need to anticipate objections. And so as you're doing the training, well, some of you may be thinking, what's the big deal? I don't, I have my hair's cut really close, or I'm bald, and I don't need to wear a hairnet. Well, let me address that for everybody now, right? So if you bring these questions up in advance, that always helps your credibility as well, because you're seeing the other side.
It does. And in addition to that point I made earlier, every time I start training, I always make it very clear that no one's going to follow GMPs because of the 20-minute training that I offer. That's nobody's suddenly going to be magically transformed into a compliant, whatever version of their work is. I always go back to my goal for the training experience is to help the person sitting across from me find a very personal reason to think about hand washing and hairnets and wearing the booties. Because I genuinely believe that we make decisions at the speed of lightning. When you're doing something else, like you need to fix a broken this, or you need to bring the roof down and fix the leak on whatever, people focus on the decisions that are about the task that's in front of them. GMPs are a barrier, and they're there and they're inherent. It's not something that they're sitting and thinking about, is my hairnet still sitting right? Are my gloves dirty enough that I need to change them? Did my booties get ripped? It's not part of the normal task that they're doing in real time. And so how do I bring them back to asking that question when it's not the focus of their task? And it goes back to that motivation. So I always start with a simple question. Think about, who in your life do you want? A contractor working in a food manufacturing, or a frontline operator, or a food safety manager working in food manufacturing. Who in your life do you want them to be thinking about, to be protecting? Who do you do food safety for? Once you have that person in your mind, Now flip the switch and assume that everybody else who eats food in the world has that person that they want you to protect, because you don't know who's going to eat the product wherever you are in the world. Anytime that you're working in food manufacturing, that is food that somebody is going to eat. Those people are as important to other people's lives as your person in mind is important to you. So anytime that you're doing something, you need to stop and ask yourself, if somebody else was in my situation, would I want them to wash their hands to protect my loved one, whoever is it in your mind? That is a lot more effective because it's personal. It makes food safety a lived experience for them as part of their work, which might have nothing to do with food safety directly. They might be fixing a bolt under something that is a zone 4, right? So in the end, it's never about the training that you're doing in real time. It's bringing this person to a space where what you're saying has a real lived experience for them. And it might have nothing to do with what you think motivates them to learn. It might not be that at all. It might be their great grandmother that experienced a foodborne illness 20 years ago, and the story has been told through generations. You never know what it is that motivates people. You can't assume that you do.
Yep. And I was laughing to myself as you're saying that, because you clicked something there for me, Morrine, which I think think about these things in terms of common experiences that they can relate to outside of the manufacturing environment. So everybody, I want you to paint a picture. Think about this. You're out at your favorite restaurant. You're out with your wife. It's your anniversary. This is a special, special evening, and you love this restaurant. And you've been thinking about that fantastic filet mignon and that bottle of wine for the whole week, and you're so excited to go. And you get to the restaurant, and you see the server, and she's back over, getting ready to come over to your table. And the server comes over and does this. Hey, can I take your order? Right? Everybody in that room's going to go, oh my God, right? What are you going to do in that situation? Oh, I'm going to leave the restaurant. Oh my God. Or how many times have you seen this, right? Where they bring cups to the table and they do this, right? They put their thumb inside the cup, and you're just like, oh, what? Right? The entire experience is ruined. And then walk people through that scenario. If enough people see that, what's going to happen? Well, people are going to quit going to the restaurant. What's going to happen? The restaurant's going to go out of business. What will happen to us if we do the same in what we do? Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. Showing them that perspective.
Definitely. Yeah, I think the ick factor definitely is always a strong motivator, because most of us have that somewhere along the way. There's something that is an ick for us.
Yeah. Well, and really, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Morrine.
No, I was just going to add to Austin's point that as a food microbiologist, I'm always fascinated by the ick factor, because it's the only way I know to help people relate to microbes, because for the most times, people have never seen bacteria in real life. COVID kind of changed that a little bit, and we all got to see what viruses look like. And my mom is always telling me about COVID and how fascinating she thought the structure of the virus looked. To drive my point home, yesterday I was at a presentation, and the professor was telling me about what they're doing with phages in the food industry to try and control pathogens. Well, I love the word phage, right? It's a phage that's going after salmonella. It sounds fancy, but a phage is a virus, right? And so now when I say, well, we're using viruses to try and kill salmonella, for the consumer, that has a completely different ring to it, right? Nobody wants you to add a virus of any kind anywhere in their lives, whether the virus is good or bad, right? So the ick factor allows people, it makes bacteria and viruses and all of these unseen things real, tangible. You can feel them. They run through your system. You can feel the anger almost percolating down your spine when somebody touches their nose and then tries to hand you a plate. That's a universal response, right? And that's relatable. It's better than me trying to tell you about plating E. coli and Salmonella to try and understand why, 128,000 people get sick. And so it's a nice one because it's relatable and it's easy to get people there because everyone has had that experience.
Yeah, and this is something that Austin's an expert in is telling the story. So now imagine in your training, you turn it over to the group and say, okay, everybody, tell me your stories of what you found when you ate out at restaurants, right? And everybody has those stories. Christian here, right? Harry my food in a restaurant when he was at 8 years old. And he's remembered that the entire time, right? And to this point, he's just like, right? And that's never going to go away. My wife doesn't like worms. And we went to a restaurant one time and she ordered an organic salad and all that stuff. And there was a teeny little inchworm on a piece of lettuce. And she shot back from the table, just screamed. And I'm just like, oh, what? And the reaction of the manager was like, oh yeah, it's organic. We get some bugs every now and then. Wrong answer.
Wrong answer.
We got up, left that restaurant. We were out of there. People have those stories.
A great story that I think it was Catherine Davidson told me. I think she's over at Sabra now, but I've known her for years. And she talked about putting together a training for people, and she ordered pizza in to, because it was like a lunch training. And the pizza comes in, and she grabs plates to go start to serve people and she makes sure that they're kind of watching, and she takes a plate and serves a couple of people, and then she takes a piece of pizza and throws it on the floor and then picks it up and puts it on a plate and goes to hand it to somebody, and the whole room is aghast, right? And then that kind of sets up the conversation around, everything from wearing gloves to why we don't pick things up off the floor. But it's, I think that shock factor is a brilliant strategy because she definitely captured their attention, because it was just such a unsocial thing to do, to throw a piece of food on the floor and then put it on a plate and give it to somebody.
Right. So if you wouldn't do that in a restaurant, or you wouldn't eat anything that someone did that, why in the world do you think it's acceptable in our plant? Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I got it. Right. Those things click. So really, there's kind of, within GMPs, there's kind of the three horsemen of the apocalypse that we're always trying to tackle, right? There's gloves, there's your hairnet, and the third one that we're always constantly fighting is hand washing. Right? That's, people view that as an extra chore too. And you've got, kind of like the glow stuff, which is awesome to kind of show you if you did a bad job and things like this. But part of this too, and this is something with Meritech as well, Austin, that they focus in on, is how can you automate these things to make it easier for people to do?
Yeah. I was out at SQF a couple of weeks ago, and I was introduced to this term that I thought was awesome, called Japanese phrase called poka-yoke, which translates into basically foolproof, or even better translation, idiot proof. So how do we make stuff that is foolproof, right? And that's one of the reasons I came over to Meritech, because automated hand washing systems, that can perfectly wash someone's hands, without them thinking about it, right? They just stick their hands in cylinders, they spin around, they deliver the hand wash, and then they go about their day. That's a great example of poka-yoke, right? You can't mess that up, because of the fact that, like you said, it's one of the four horsemen, or the three horsemen. It's never done properly. Like, very rarely are people washing their hands properly. And it's because it's a tedious process to do it as per the CDC, right? Yeah.
And I think, Austin, you and I have had this conversation before when you first moved to Meritech about, I always try to play devil's advocate when it comes to technology and see the potential flip side of the coin. So think about a situation where an operator is used to working in a facility where there are automated hand washing stations easily available, they're properly placed, and then they transition to a place where there are no the automated hand washing stations. If we're not careful in the way that we help people learn about hand washing and the reason we do it and why the hand washing station is is an assist in getting us to do it thoroughly and not a replacement of how we think about hand washing as a technique. What happens is people can actually become desensitized to the value of proper hand washing when it is not automated for them. And so let's say that they no longer are able to stick their hands in the automated hand wash and have their 12 seconds. That combination of time and chemical composition of that machine does a thorough job. If they do the same thing on a normal hand washing station where they put soap on their hands and kind of wiggle their hands for 12 seconds, it doesn't work quite the same. So I always go back to when we are doing hand washing training, again, to your point, Austin, having the foundation of why, and then introducing the automation as making things easier once we understand why. Kind of like you can cut paper with your fingers, but scissors work much better, right? So learning how to wash your hands properly as a technique and a skill, and then the machine just making it easy and faster, which saves us time. So it's not a replacement to the thorough understanding of the fundamentals of proper hand washing in public health. It is an enhancement to the process itself. That's how I like to think of it.
Yeah, because I mean, if people don't understand the why, they can just walk right past the machine anyways, right? That's it. And unless you put in like a turnstile system, right, where it's like, okay, you have to wash your hands to be able to open the turnstile to enter this next, area of the facility. Yeah. But yeah, when I was introduced to that term, I thought that was really cool because this is something that we've talked about in food safety culture for a long time, is this concept around nudge theory, and so how do we create nudges within the environment to make it as easy as possible to make the right decision or the healthy decision, and make it harder to make the wrong decision or the unhealthy decision. And so much of what we see within the food processing environment, sometimes, right, people can have all of the great knowledge from the training, they can develop the skill, but then the environment is completely not conducive to them engaging in the behavior that we're looking for, right? You don't have a proper GMP zone. You don't have sinks placed in the right area of the facility. You got people walking through specific doors that are meant just for forklifts, and, so that you're not getting proper, like shoe sanitation. So I think that's the other element that we overlook a lot, which is that good training and skill development doesn't automatically override bad environmental design. Because ultimately people will default back to what's easiest. And a lot of times with these facilities, it's easier to do the wrong thing. So I'm fascinated at looking at facilities and how they're laid out, and traffic patterns, and how people move about throughout the facility throughout their day. Because they can have all the great information in the world, but then they go back into the real world and it's like, well, it's just not conducive to me execute this skill, right? Which is a whole other conversation around environmental design.
Right. Well, and too, having the right design allows you to measure compliance. And part of this too, right, is, and Morrine had referenced this as well, is you're going to have people who actively resist. It's like, I'm not following that stuff. That's not for me. You need to find who out those people are, right? And if they're unwilling to change, they can't be working in those areas where GMP compliance is needed. Maybe you move them somewhere else. Hey, guess what? You've been promoted to groundskeeping outside the plant. You're not going in the plant anymore. Or that's not the right place for them to work because they just don't get it.
And
that's reality.
I remember a conversation around storytelling, and this particular trainer mentioned that everybody has motivation. It's just we are always too busy to figure out what it is. And our own biases usually get in the way of trying to understand that person. And so oftentimes you'll hear somebody say, oh, don't worry about Jack. He doesn't care. He could care less. If your heart is beating, you care about something, right? And so having side conversations outside of the formal training structure with this person, when it is not about GMPs, it's not about hairnets, it's not about the food safety plan, it's about life. How are you doing? How are the kids? How is life? What do you enjoy doing outside of work? Having that heart-to-heart conversation, in the hallway. If you speak to this person once or twice, for most people, usually their motivation or what drives them in life or what is hurting them becomes apparent. And it might have nothing to do with manufacturing or what you want them to be doing in life. It might be a personal problem that is from decades ago that's just constantly nudging at them through history. So, yes, our job is to make sure that food systems are running effectively and getting good, safe product out the door. But we are all human beings. And at a time like this, when there's so much stressors coming from different directions, building those personal relationships with people actually makes those serious situations where we really have to sit down and discuss real topics much easier, because people already respect you. They already see you as you have a buy-in in their interests. You care about them as human beings. And so they have a reason to want to listen to what you have to say. You're not just the person that shows up on Fridays in the morning when they're trying to get out of a weekend shift, trying to get out of a week-long shift, trying to go home. You are somebody who wants to know how their life is doing. And oftentimes we don't see that as valuable. But based on my personal experience, I think it is valuable for people to know that you care more about them than you do about how they wear gloves.
Yeah. Well, and part of that, right there, look for changes, right? We hear this when we learn about body language and things like this. It's not necessarily, that doesn't mean you're lying. It's a change in body language that indicates that something's going on with that person. So we don't, to Marine's point, we don't necessarily know. So let's say that person who is normally very good, is normally very good. I guess you didn't like what I was saying. But, normally that person who's very good at complying with GMPs all of a sudden isn't. Just talking with them and saying, hey, what's up? Welcome back. So what we were talking about, Morrine, was, people who are normally compliant who all of a sudden aren't. Maybe something's going on at home. They have a teenager at home who has decided to start being crazy, right? And they're constantly thinking about what this wacky teenager is doing, and they're not concentrating on their work. To your point, simply talking with them and saying, hey, normally you're really good at doing this stuff. What's up? Oh God, let's go to the lunchroom. Let's have a bit of lunch and I'll tell you what's going on, type thing. That goes a long way.
And someone told me the phrase once that really changed my outlook, and it's kind of a duh phrase, but they, said everyone is the hero in their own story. And when I started looking through that lens at people and realizing, because we can get so wrapped up in our own stuff, of what's important to us, right? And realizing that that person that I'm talking to has the exact same feeling that I do about their own world. And so figuring out how to merge these two worlds together in a way, but realizing that, everyone is the hero in their own story, so that there's a completely different story going on with that person than you probably could ever imagine.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe they just found out their wife has a disease, something horrible. Just put yourself in their shoes. Would you be thinking about work 100%? Probably not, right? So work with that person. And this kind of gets to, I think, a fatal flaw that I definitely want to talk about here in our chat here today, is this one size fits all mentality that we can load people into a conference room, show a 10-year-old PowerPoint, and everybody's going to get the exact same message and be immediately compliant. Nope. Right. So part of this is you need to look at your GMP training and customize it. Really? Yeah, you need to do that. So if you have training for the personnel on the floor, great. But don't forget, you need to have special training for the management team as well. Because part of this is that hidden danger of, you can't get training for everybody. So let's say there's some new employees that come in during the year, the quality manager's out, and it falls upon that person's supervisor to do the training. They are now representing the company and you. Are they doing a good job of that? Or are they just going in there and say, hey, listen, yeah, glad you're here. We're super shorthanded. Oh my God, are we behind? I'm required to give you some GMP training. So let's get through this crap and then we'll get you out on the floor. That employee is now ruined, right? You've got to spend the next year trying to undo what that supervisor did, if you even know that happened. So you need to have specialized training for those supervisors and managers to say, you set the example. You are required to be 100% compliant on this stuff all the time, because if you're not, how can we expect our people to be? And you need to be advocates in everything that we're talking about here today. You need to be doing as well. And part of that is I did a survey here, guys, on LinkedIn, and I asked the question around training for GMPs. And do you have specific training? So here's the results of that survey. So do you have specific GMP practice trainings for workers and management? So interesting, right? So nope, 40% do the same, and 53% good, have targeted materials for those different groups. And then so here's my recalcitrant back of the class people, right? They're saying what is GMP training? I bet Cortland, I think he's in that group giving that answer. That's my guess. But a lot of people don't think about that. You need to have segmented training. Is it more work? Yeah. I mean, what are you guys' thoughts around that?
I think a big assumption that is made is that because someone is good at their job or that they're an SME, that automatically translates into being a good trainer. And that is an assumption that needs to be killed immediately, because and it doesn't take a lot to learn how to do GMP training, right? But just those basic things like you were talking about, what's your attitude going into it, right? How do you create an environment where people are asking questions and thinking about, because I look at training as like the biggest way for people to retain information is to get them to think about it, to ask them questions and get them to mull it over, right? And so but I think a lot of people have the assumption that a trainer goes in and is the leader and says, here's what's going on, I'm going to bestow this information upon you and you will go out into the world and do great things, right? And the training's not about the trainer, right? Everyone's the hero in their own story. So how do I bring that hero out and ask questions and get them to think about this so that they're applying their own worldly knowledge, right? Because anyone we're hiring, whether they're 18 years old or 70 years old, right? They have a certain amount of real world knowledge that has gotten them to the place that they are. And so how do we start to tap into that? But yeah, I think, there's the element of the trainer, right? That needs to be taken into effect.
Yeah. Speaking from personal experience, did I ever go get any of that type of training on how to be effective? No, absolutely not. Right. You have to learn it by failing, right? And trying to figure out what works. And it's very inefficient.
And I always start training with a question. And I know this is going to seem so obvious and so silly. I always just start with, have you ever heard of the word GMP?
Yeah.
What does the word GMP mean to you, right? Because good manufacturing practices are not special to the food industry. It's industry specific. That term is about system management, right? So it's context specific. And so frontline operators often have worked in other places that are not necessarily food manufacturing. Have they ever heard of GMPs? Perhaps they have in a different context. And so if I'm in a room with two people who've never heard of the word GMPs, I know I'm starting building this, from the ground up. Yeah. If I'm in a room with people who have heard that term before or who've even had experience getting food safety GMP training, then I know it's about bringing down potential walls that have come up from previous training, but also making it unique enough so that it's not a repetition of the same stuff that they've heard over and over and over again. What's unique about this 20 minutes that they're going to be spending with me in this space? And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's essentially my point is we often think about the big grand finale of training as we want to achieve this revolutionary change in human behavior. But we sometimes forget that even starting with the basics of do we even know, do we have a commonality of what are GMPs to start with and why are they important? That very basic foundational. Starting there allows the energy in the room to dissipate and all the stressed out tension. You've started with a question that's low key, very welcoming. You're not putting anyone on the spot. People tell you their personal experiences. You ask them, okay, tell me more. What context do you know of GMPs from? They're already telling you stories. You're already engaging in conversations that have nothing to do with the PowerPoint they're about to look at or lack thereof.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and to your point as well, Morrine, is that if you ask that question, what are GMPs, and somebody in the back raises their hand, goes, a waste of time, right? Now you're like, okay, right, okay, there's my troublemaker right there. And to Larry's point, okay, this is all well and good, but legally they must comply. Yeah, but how does that work in our own lives, right? Again, turning us around. We all know the speed limit by your house is 35. Who occasionally goes over 35 by a little bit?
Just
by
Bryan.
a lot? Yeah. Right. So yeah, are you breaking the law? Yeah, you're breaking the law. Does it stop you? No. Now, if you get a ticket or two, then your motivation is going to change. Once you start seeing the pain of your increased insurance rates, and God forbid you get in a wreck or something. But I think in reality, I'm curious to get you guys' comments on this. That threat, right? That stick. How much does that really motivate people?
I don't think in the long term, not much at all. If you're motivating with the stick, you have to always motivate with the stick. The stick has to constantly be present, and that's a form of micromanagement that most companies can't afford to do. So I think removing that extrinsic, that external motivator of my fear of punishment, and like we've been talking about through the entire this talk, which is figuring out what connects with people. We ultimately make decisions based on emotions, right? And then we reinforce that decision with logic, not vice versa. I think a lot of people assume that we make logical decisions. We don't, right? We make decisions because we have an emotional connection to it. And then we justify that through some type of logic. So, I mean, going back to, once again, everyone's the hero in their own story. So what's that story that someone's going to tell themselves that will keep them doing it even when I'm not being micromanaged, when no one's watching, right?
I want to reinforce what you said there, Austin. And this is going to be a hard thing if you pull one new learning out of our conversation here today, because we're all logical, technical people. Decisions are emotion based. Sorry, it's true. When I first learned that, and Scott Adams is really good at talking about that. That's a hard thing. But just look in your own life. Let's think about how you're thinking about buying a new car. The first thing you're looking at is performance and looks, and look at this cool car and all these type of things. And then you look at the price, and then you start figuring out ways to justify that expensive car, right? Well, no, honey, this is a very safe 700 horsepower car. Absolutely. And yeah, you may be starting to see a theme here with me on that, right? Getting a sports car and breaking the speed limit. But yeah, people absolutely do that.
And I think back to the point we started with earlier is it's really, really difficult to force people to do things they don't want to do. And I don't think that any food safety manager or any compliance manager's job should be to force people to follow GMPs. There's not enough hours in a year for that.
Right.
And so we go back to this story of what is the company culture and what does management consider having the right people in the boat, right? The boat will keep sailing. It will just keep on going. The days come and go. Food is going in and out the door every day. And so the risk factor is always a looming factor. And the goal is, how do we manage risk so that nobody gets hurt by the product that we are putting out?
Yeah.
Human beings are emotional. That's true. We make emotional decisions, and then again, followed by logic. And oftentimes we can justify ourselves into just about anything under the sun. We've seen that done in both good and bad ways. So at some point, between normal training, follow-up conversations and coaching, PIPs if needed, at some point the leadership is going to have to make a decision about, is this somebody I want to continue in my boat? Or is this somebody who's poking too many holes, and at some point our boat starts to sink, right?
Yeah.
If the person's job is not helping seal the holes, but poking holes, they're undoing the work that everybody else is doing to sustain. And so, yes, it's important to keep up with people and keep up with what's happening in their personal lives and try to manage, try to motivate, try to create an environment for thriving, for people to find their own. You cannot motivate people into anything. You can create the environment to keep them motivated or to allow them to find a reason to do their job well, but you cannot force them into it. At some point, decisions will have to be made about what the right way forward is with a particular person if their job is constantly undoing the good work.
Right. Now imagine if that person who's undoing that good work is a supervisor or a manager. Ooh, right. So if you spend everything that we're doing here today and you create these amazing programs and you think about human psychology, and the moment the supervisors and the operators go out on the floor and the supervisor tells his team, yeah, that's all good, but that doesn't really matter. Getting the product out the door is what matters. You go do your job and shut up. Everything that you did is now gone, right? You need to know that. And
not only do you have, at that point, you don't have just one person poking holes, you have the supervisor and their entire team poking holes in the boat, right? It's so now there's a crew of people undoing the good work.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, Larry's got some really good comments here, guys, as well. Make sure and read through those. So we're just about out of time. So let's kind of bring this up to summary. So Austin, we'll start with you. What would you like to leave people with here today?
Man, training is not about talking at people, right? But like creating an environment for questions, critical thinking, relationship building. It's not just a PowerPoint and speaking at people, and keeping in mind that we all have a decision-making process that is based on emotions, and so it's finding what are those emotions that are going to drive people. That if we rely strictly on logic, very rarely will stuff get accomplished.
Yeah. Well said. Miss Omolo, what are you thinking here today?
I'd like to take a step back and look at this from a more umbrella perspective, from the food safety culture umbrella. And GMPs are just one of the many things that indicate, how mature the food safety culture is. But I always like to think of food safety culture as a tree that's growing. It's not the soil, it's not the minerals, it's not the fertilizer, it's the imagined factor of all of those little pieces working together. I'm hard pressed to find a company that has a mature, sustainable food safety culture that's having a really difficult time getting basic GMPs working. So I always go with compliance as an idea in training. It's just something that's introduced. Compliance towards competence as people are growing and learning to be competent. But at some point, we have to grow from competence and compliance to continuous improvement, because we can also have the curse of competence where people are, I'm good at my job, and that's all they focus on. And what happens if the job changes or the industry changes or the risks change? We have to grow. So I think of this as continuous improvement. And even with GMPs, at some point it's about compliance, but then we have to grow out of that into continuous improvement, doing things better.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a great summary. So to kind of bring it back around full circle, is there's a reason why FDA focuses so much on the plants when they go in, and if you get a warning letter, why GMPs are front and center. If you do a poor job with the basics, it's a health indicator, right? You got kind of like a gauge that's going, right? Okay, how am I doing? And if you have poor GMPs in your facility, nothing else is going to work. That's food safety culture, and that's how you get to that. And the other thing I want to leave everybody with here as well too is this is not a one and done. This is not okay. It's time for the annual GMP training. Time to dust off the PowerPoint. No. This is a daily habit of teaching, reinforcing, and making sure that everyone understands from their viewpoint why this is important. It's a never-ending task.
Correct.
Yep. So with that, guys, fantastic chat. Amazing engagement as always. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Greatly appreciated. Austin, Morrine, thank you as well. Always amazing when I have you guys on. And part of what I always look to your point earlier, Morrine, is, learning and growing. Yeah, I love that too. And if you can pull one new little piece of information out of a presentation or a conference or things like that, incorporate that, use it, grow with that. That's all you need, right? Is you don't have to reinvent the world. All growth is incremental. So every day, just continue to build a little bit more and you're on the right path. So with that, everybody, we'll bring our chat to a close here for this week. Another amazing chat, of course. And we will be back here next Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn and YouTube, where we live stream. And I'll have another amazing guest on the show like Austin and Morrine. Thank you for joining us. Always greatly appreciated. And to everybody else. So have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself. And we'll see you back here next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.